Well, hello there. My name is George Prescott, and let me tell you, retirement ain't all it's cracked up to be. Especially when some punk kid mechanic thinks he can pull a fast one on you. See, I've got this, '67 Mustang, a real beauty. Kept her in mint condition, always have. 40 years I spent building airplanes over at Boeing, so I know a thing or two about engines, you could say. This Mustang, she's my baby. So, a few weeks back, I noticed a little something, a slight ticking noise coming from the engine. Nothing major, mind you, but I like to keep things running smooth. My so-called friend, Frank, recommended this new mechanic, some hotshot kid who supposedly knew his stuff. Best in town, Frank said. Should have known better than to trust Frank, come to think of it. I took the Mustang over to this kid's garage, explained the noise, told him I suspected it might be a valve lifter starting to go. The kid, barely old enough to shave, gives me this look like I'm some senile old fool. He pops the hood, barely glances at the engine, and says, "That's not the problem." I know nothing. Can you believe the nerve? This kid, talking to me like that, a man who's designed engines that flew across continents. He tells me it's a worn-out fuel pump, needs replacing. I knew that wasn't it, but I figured, what the heck? Maybe I'm wrong. I let him do the work. Charged me an arm and a leg for a simple fuel pump replacement, too. Highway robbery, plain and simple. I drove the Mustang home, and the ticking noise was still there, of course. But now there was something else. A new kind of rumbling. A deeper vibration that wasn't there before. I knew right then. That little punk hadn't just ripped me off. He'd messed with my car. He'd done something else, something deliberate, to make it worse. And it dawned on me then. Frank. He'd been trying to get me to sell him the Mustang for months, offering me a pittance. He'd probably put this kid up to it, sabotage the car, so I'd be desperate to get rid of it. Well, let me tell you, I saw red. 40 years I spent building machines that defied gravity, and this kid, this 2-bit grease monkey, thinks he can outsmart me? And Frank, the snake, using me like that after all these years? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. They thought they could take advantage of an old man, did they? They had another thing coming. I might be retired, but my mind, it's still sharper than any wrench in that kid's toolbox. They picked the wrong retiree to mess with. Those punks, they had no idea who they were dealing with. 40 years at Boeing, I wasn't just pushing papers. I was part of the team that designed the 777's wing. That wing, it's a marvel of engineering, a testament to human ingenuity. Thousands of parts, all working together in perfect harmony, to lift 100 tons of metal into the sky. I poured my heart and soul into that project. Countless hours, late nights, weekends, missed birthdays, anniversaries, all to make sure that wing was perfect. And it was. We faced challenges, of course. Turbulence issues, material fatigue, weight restrictions. Each problem, a puzzle to be solved, a mountain to be climbed. But we did it. We overcame every obstacle with hard work, dedication, and a whole lot of coffee. I remember one time we were having this issue with flutter, a dangerous vibration in the wing. We were stumped, couldn't figure out the cause. We spent weeks, months even, poring over data, running simulations, testing different designs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I noticed a tiny anomaly in the airflow patterns, something everyone else had missed. A slight change in the wingtip design, and the flutter was gone. Just like that. My colleagues, they looked at me like I was some kind of wizard. I wasn't a wizard, just a man who knew his craft, a man who was dedicated to his work. And that's how it was for 40 years. Respect, admiration. I earned it, every bit of it. I wasn't just an engineer. I was a craftsman, an artist, a problem solver. I built things that flew, things that connected people, things that changed the world. And now, some kid, some snot-nosed punk mechanic, thinks he can disrespect me, thinks he can treat me like I'm some clueless old man? And Frank, my supposed friend, the one I confided in, the one I trusted, he was in on it too. Betrayal, that's what it was. A knife in the back, K. It wasn't just about the money, although that certainly stung. It was about the principle of the thing. It was about the disrespect, the disregard for my experience, for my life's work. They thought they could get away with it because I was retired, because I was old. They thought I was weak, vulnerable. They were wrong, dead wrong. They underestimated me. They underestimated the quiet fury that simmered beneath the surface, the fire that 40 years of dedication had forged. They thought they could extinguish that fire. They were about to learn that some fires, they only burn hotter with age. That Mustang, she wasn't just a car, she was a time machine. She took me back to a different era, a simpler time. I bought her brand new, back in '67. Candy apple red, with a white racing stripe. She was the hottest thing on four wheels, and I was the proudest young engineer in Seattle. Drove her straight off the lot and haven't looked back since. Every nut, every bolt, I knew her inside and out. Spent countless weekends tinkering under the hood, keeping her running like a dream. Rebuilt the engine twice, replaced the transmission, even reupholstered the seats myself. She wasn't just a car, she was a project, a labor of love, a reflection of my own meticulous nature, my own dedication to precision and excellence, just like my work at Boeing. I remember bringing her home for the first time. My wife, bless her soul, she wasn't a car person, but even she had to admit that Mustang was something special. We took her for a spin down the coast, the wind in our hair, the sun on our faces. It was a perfect day. We had so many adventures in that car, so many memories. Family vacations, trips to the mountains, even our honeymoon. That Mustang, she was a part of our family. And Frank, he knew that. He knew how much that car meant to me. We'd been friends for over 30 years, shared countless barbecues, fishing trips, even helped each other build our houses. I trusted him. I thought he was a good man. Clearly, I was wrong. He'd been eyeing that Mustang for years, always making comments about how much he loved it, how he'd always wanted one just like it. He'd offer to buy it from me, but I always refused. It wasn't about the money. It was about the memories, the sentimental value. He knew that. Or so I thought. Now it all made sense. The overly enthusiastic recommendation of this young mechanic, the insistence that I take the car to him, it was all a setup. Frank had probably promised the kid a cut of the profits if he could sabotage the car and make me desperate enough to sell it cheap. The thought of it, the betrayal, it made my stomach churn. How could he do this to me? After all these years, after everything we'd been through together. I sat in my garage, staring at the Mustang, the ticking noise now a constant reminder of Frank's treachery, the young mechanic's arrogance. The injustice of it all, it burned inside me. I felt like a fool, like I'd been played for a sucker. But then, something shifted. The anger, the hurt, it transformed into something else. A quiet resolve, a steely determination. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I wouldn't be a victim. I was George Prescott, a retired aeronautical engineer, a man who had spent his life solving complex problems. And this was just another problem to be solved. A particularly nasty one, perhaps, but a problem nonetheless. And I was going to solve it. They thought they could outsmart me. They had no idea. The garage was a mess, greasy tools scattered everywhere, the air thick with the smell of oil and exhaust fumes. The kid, whose name I later learned was Kevin, barely looked up from the greasy rag he was wiping his hands on. I explained the ticking noise as clearly and concisely as I could, even mimicking the sound, trying to convey the subtle rhythm, the almost imperceptible variation in pitch. I told him I suspected it might be a valve lifter, maybe starting to wear down. Kevin smirked, a condescending curl of his lip. He sauntered over to the Mustang, popped the hood, and barely glanced at the engine. He poked around a bit, tapping a few things with a wrench, seemingly at random. Then he straightened up, that same smug look on his face, and said, "That's not the problem. You know nothing." I was taken aback. "Excuse me," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I know a thing or two about engines. I spent 40 years. He cut me off. Yeah, whatever. He waved his hand dismissively. "It's the fuel pump. Needs replacing." I knew that wasn't it. The fuel pump had been replaced just a few months ago. But I decided to play along, see what this kid was up to. "All right," I said, "if you say so. How much will it cost?" He named a price that was outrageous, almost double what I'd paid the last time. "That seems a bit steep," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Take it or leave it, old man," he said, shrugging. "Nobody else is going to fix it for you." The old man comment stung. I wanted to tell him off, to remind him who he was talking to. A man who designed engines that powered some of the most advanced aircraft in the world. But I held back. I wanted to see how far he'd take this. I agreed to the repair, telling him I'd be back later to pick up the car. As I walked out of the garage, I had a sinking feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. This kid, he wasn't just incompetent, he was dishonest. He was trying to rip me off. And then the thought hit me. Frank. This had to be Frank's doing. He'd been after my Mustang for months, offering me a ridiculously low price. He'd probably put this kid up to it, promised him a cut of the profits if he could sabotage the car and make me desperate enough to sell it. I drove home, my mind racing. I couldn't believe Frank would do this to me after all these years, after all we'd been through together. The betrayal, it cut deep. But as I pulled into my driveway, a new emotion began to surface, replacing the hurt and confusion. Anger. A cold, hard anger. They thought they could get away with this, did they? They thought they could take advantage of an old man? They were wrong. Dead wrong. They had underestimated me. They had no idea what I was capable of. I parked the Mustang in the garage, the rumbling a constant, throbbing accusation. I couldn't just leave it like that. I grabbed my toolbox, the one I'd used for decades, filled with tools I'd meticulously cared for, tools that had helped me build and maintain not just cars, but airplanes. This wasn't just a hobby. It was an extension of my profession, a testament to my precision and skill. I popped the hood, the familiar scent of engine oil and grease filling the air. It wasn't the smell of a problem, it was the smell of potential, of possibility. I started systematically checking the fuel lines, the spark plugs, the distributor. Everything seemed normal, at least on the surface. Then I got to the carburetor. That's when I saw it. A tiny, almost invisible prick, a pinhole in the fuel line, just below the carburetor. It was so small, it would have been easy to miss. But I didn't miss it. 40 years of scrutinizing complex machinery had trained my eye to spot the smallest imperfection, the slightest deviation from the norm. This wasn't wear and tear, this was deliberate. Someone had intentionally damaged the fuel line, creating a slow leak that would eventually starve the engine of fuel, causing serious damage. And that rumbling, that new vibration I'd felt on the way home, that was probably the beginnings of a rod knock, a sign that the engine was already starting to suffer. This wasn't just a rip-off, it was sabotage. I stood back, my hands covered in grease, my mind racing. Who would do this, and why? Then it hit me, like a punch to the gut. Frank. It had to be Frank. He'd been pestering me to sell him the Mustang for months, offering me a fraction of what it was worth. He'd always admired the car, always making comments about how much he'd love to own it. I'd always dismissed his offers, politely, but firmly. The car wasn't just a car to me. It was a piece of my history, a symbol of my youth, my passion. I wasn't going to sell it, not to him, not to anyone. Now it all made sense. Frank had probably put this kid Kevin up to it. Promised him a cut of the profits if he could sabotage the car and make me desperate enough to sell it cheap. The thought of it, the betrayal, it made my blood boil. Frank, my friend, the man I'd trusted for years, the man I'd shared countless beers and fishing trips with. He'd stabbed me in the back. I closed the hood, the metallic clang echoing in the silence of the garage. The anger, the hurt, it was overwhelming. But underneath it all, something else was stirring. A quiet resolve, a steely determination. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I wouldn't be a victim. I might be retired, but I wasn't helpless. I had spent my entire career solving complex problems, overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. And this was just another problem. A particularly nasty one, perhaps, but a problem nonetheless, and I was going to solve it. They thought they could outsmart me, did they? They thought they could take advantage of an old man? They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea what I was capable of. They had underestimated me, and they were going to regret it. They were going to regret it dearly. This wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about principle. It was about respect. It was about revenge. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the events of the day, the smug look on Kevin's face, the condescending tone of his voice. You know nothing. The words echoed in my head, a constant, irritating drone. And Frank, the betrayal, it felt like a physical blow. How could he do this to me? I got out of bed, went down to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the gentle clinking of the teacup, it was strangely comforting. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my tea, my mind slowly beginning to clear. I needed to do something, anything, to take my mind off things. I opened my laptop and started browsing the internet. Almost without thinking, I typed Kevin's garage name into the search bar. The first few results were the usual: the garage's website, a few local directory listings. But then I started seeing something else: online reviews. And they weren't good. One after another, they told a similar story. Overcharged repairs, shoddy workmanship, aggressive and condescending behavior. Ripped off, scam artist, avoid this place like the plague. The words jumped off the screen. It was a pattern, a clear and consistent pattern of dishonest and unethical business practices. One review in particular caught my eye. A woman had taken her car to Kevin's garage for a simple oil change. Kevin had convinced her that she needed a new transmission, charging her thousands of dollars for a repair that was completely unnecessary. The woman had later taken her car to another mechanic, who confirmed that the transmission was perfectly fine. She tried to get her money back from Kevin, but he'd refused, claiming that the work had been necessary. The woman had filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau, but nothing had come of it. I read through dozens of reviews, each one adding to the growing picture of Kevin's dishonesty and incompetence. It was clear that he wasn't just a bad mechanic, he was a con artist, preying on unsuspecting customers, using his knowledge and position to take advantage of them. And the more I read, the more convinced I became that Frank was in on it. He must have known about Kevin's reputation, about his shady business practices. He'd probably chosen Kevin specifically because he knew he could be easily manipulated, easily persuaded to participate in his scheme. I closed my laptop, a grim satisfaction settling over me. I had the first piece of the puzzle. I knew what kind of man Kevin was, what motivated him, what his weaknesses were. Now, I needed to find out more about Frank. What was his motivation? What was his angle? I knew he'd been having financial difficulties lately. He'd mentioned something about a bad investment, a business deal gone sour. Maybe he was desperate for money. Maybe he saw my Mustang as a quick and easy way to make a profit. I opened my laptop again, this time searching for Frank's name. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. News articles, court records, online forums. The picture that emerged was not pretty. Frank had a history of shady business dealings, of cutting corners, of taking advantage of people. He'd been involved in several lawsuits, accused of fraud, breach of contract, even embezzlement. He'd managed to avoid serious consequences in the past, but it was clear that he was living on borrowed time. His current financial difficulties were just the latest in a long string of bad decisions and questionable ethics. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces of the puzzle slowly beginning to fit together. Frank was desperate. He needed money, and he needed it fast. He'd seen my Mustang as an opportunity, a way to make a quick profit. He de-used Kevin, knowing that he was unscrupulous and easily manipulated. Together, they'd hatched their plan, thinking they could take advantage of an old man, a retired engineer who they assumed was clueless and vulnerable. They were wrong. Dead wrong. They had underestimated me. And they were going to pay for it. I stared at the ceiling, the patterns of the plaster swirling in the dim light of the early morning. Sleep was a distant memory. My mind, usually a calm and ordered place, was a whirlwind of thoughts, memories, and calculations. 40 years. 40 years I dedicated to Boeing, to the art and science of aerospace engineering. 40 years of meticulous work, of painstaking attention to detail, of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And for what? To be dismissed by some punk kid mechanic? To be betrayed by a so-called friend? I rolled over, punching my pillow in frustration. It wasn't just the Mustang, not really. It was the disrespect, the casual dismissal of my experience, of my life's work. You know nothing, the words echoed in my head, a grating reminder of Kevin's arrogance. I got out of bed, pulled on my robe, and went downstairs. The house was quiet, still and cool in the pre-dawn hours. I made myself a cup of coffee, the familiar aroma filling the air, a small comfort in the midst of the turmoil. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping the hot liquid, my mind slowly beginning to settle. I thought back to my early days at Boeing, fresh out of college, eager to prove myself. I'd started as a junior engineer, assigned to the 747 program. It was an exciting time, the dawn of the jumbo jet era, a time of innovation and ambition. I'd worked on the wing design, a complex and challenging task, requiring a deep understanding of aerodynamics, structural mechanics, and materials science. I'd spent countless hours poring over blueprints, running simulations, testing different designs. It was demanding work, but I loved it. Every challenge, every obstacle was an opportunity to learn, to grow, to push myself to be better. I remembered one particular problem, a persistent vibration in the wing during wind tunnel testing. We'd tried everything, adjusting the wing shape, changing the materials, tweaking the control systems. Nothing seemed to work. We were stumped. Then, one evening, while reviewing the data for the 100th time, I noticed something. A tiny anomaly in the airflow patterns, something everyone else had missed. A slight adjustment to the leading edge slats, a barely perceptible change in the angle of attack, and the vibration disappeared. Just like that. My colleagues, they looked at me like I was some kind of wizard. I wasn't a wizard, just a man who was meticulous, a man who refused to give up. That's how it was for 40 years. Problem after problem, challenge after challenge. The 767, the 777, the Dreamliner. Each project, a new mountain to climb, a new opportunity to push the boundaries of what was possible. I'd worked on everything from engine design to flight control systems, from materials testing to structural analysis. I'd earned the respect of my colleagues, the admiration of my superiors. I wasn't just an engineer, I was a problem solver, a craftsman, an artist. And now, this petty squabble over a vintage car, this betrayal by a supposed friend. It felt so small, so insignificant, compared to the challenges I'd faced in my career. But it also felt personal, a direct affront to my integrity, my expertise, my very identity. They thought they could dismiss me, disregard me, take advantage of me. They thought I was just an old man, a relic of a bygone era. They were wrong. Dead wrong. I might be retired, but my mind was still sharp, my skills still honed, my determination still unwavering. I had spent my life building things, solving problems, overcoming obstacles. And this was just another problem to be solved. A particularly nasty one, perhaps, but a problem nonetheless. And I was going to solve it. They had underestimated me. They had no idea what I was capable of. They were about to learn a valuable lesson. They were about to learn that experience is a powerful weapon, and that revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold. The coffee was strong, bitter, just the way I liked it. It helped to clear the fog in my head, to sharpen my focus. I needed to think, to plan, to strategize. This wasn't just about getting my Mustang fixed anymore. It was about something more, something deeper. It was about restoring the balance, about righting a wrong. It was about justice. Frank's betrayal, that's what kept gnawing at me. We'd met at Boeing, back in the 70s. He was in avionics, I was in structures. We'd bonded over late nights in the lab, fueled by coffee, and a shared passion for pushing the limits of engineering. We'd worked on countless projects together, tackling complex problems, celebrating successes, commiserating over failures. We'd become more than colleagues. We'd become friends. Real friends. Or so I thought. I remembered one particular project, a particularly tricky issue with the landing gear on the 767. We were having trouble with the hydraulic system, a persistent leak that we couldn't seem to isolate. We'd spent weeks troubleshooting, checking every valve, every fitting, every line. We were at our wits' end. Then, Frank, with his encyclopedic knowledge of hydraulic systems, noticed a tiny flaw in the design of a pressure relief valve, something so small it would have been easy to miss. A simple redesign, a minor modification, and the problem was solved. Just like that. I'd been impressed, not just by his technical expertise, but by his persistence, his refusal to give up. We'd celebrated that night, sharing a bottle of scotch in his office, toasting to our ingenuity, our teamwork, our friendship. And now, this calculated betrayal, this underhanded scheme to steal my Mustang. It felt like a slap in the face, a repudiation of everything we'd shared, everything we'd built together. He'd used our friendship, our shared history, against me. He'd assumed that because I was retired, because I was old, that I was somehow less capable, less intelligent, less resourceful. He'd misjudged me, he'd underestimated me, and he was going to regret it. I finished my coffee, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue. The anger, the hurt, it was still there, a burning ember deep inside me. But it was no longer a consuming fire. It had been tempered, refined, transformed into something colder, something sharper. A quiet resolve, a steely determination. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I wasn't going to be a victim. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the rising sun. The sky was a brilliant orange, streaked with pink and purple. A new day was dawning. A new chapter was beginning. I had spent my life building things, creating things, solving problems. And now I had a new project. A project of a different kind, perhaps, but a project nonetheless. A project of retribution. A project of revenge. I went back upstairs, got dressed, and went down to the garage. I opened the hood of the Mustang, the familiar scent of engine oil and grease filling the air. I looked at the engine, the intricate network of pipes and wires, the gleaming chrome, the polished metal. This wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of my past, my present, my future. A symbol of my resilience, my ingenuity, my determination. And I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. I picked up my toolbox, the weight of it familiar and comforting in my hands. It was time to get to work. It was time to start planning. It was time to get even. I knew I couldn't just go in guns blazing. This wasn't a bar fight. This was a chess match. I needed a plan, a strategy, something elegant, something engineered. And I needed help. Luckily, I knew just the people to call. Over the years, I'd worked with some of the brightest minds in the aerospace industry. Men and women who could design a rocket engine in their sleep, who could build a satellite that could withstand the harsh conditions of outer space. These weren't just colleagues. They were friends, comrades, brothers and sisters in arms, and they owed me a few favors. First on my list was David Miller. David was a whiz with electronics, a true genius when it came to circuits and microcontrollers. He'd retired a few years before me, spending his days tinkering in his workshop, building all sorts of gadgets and gizmos. I explained my situation, the sabotage, Frank's betrayal, the whole sordid affair. David listened patiently, nodding occasionally, a glint of amusement in his eyes. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "That's quite a story, George," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "So what do you need?" I told I needed something small, something discreet, something that could disrupt electronic systems, something that could cause malfunctions. David's smile widened. "I think I might have just the thing," he said, leading me to his workbench, cluttered with wires, circuit boards, and various electronic components. He showed me a small device, no bigger than a pack of cigarettes. "This little beauty," he said, holding it up, "can emit a targeted electromagnetic pulse, enough to disrupt anything from a car's computer to a security camera. Completely untraceable, too," he winked. "Consider it a retirement project." Next, I called Sarah Johnson. Sarah was a software engineer, specializing in embedded systems. She could write code that could make a toaster dance the tango. I told her I needed a program, something that could subtly alter the readings on diagnostic equipment, something that could make a perfectly healthy engine appear to be on the verge of collapse. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, simply raised an eyebrow. "And what kind of equipment are we talking about?" she asked. I described the diagnostic tools I'd seen in Kevin's garage, the makes, the models, the software they used. Sarah nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I can whip something up," she said. "Give me a few days." Finally, I called up old Tom Evans. Tom was a mechanical engineer, a master of all things automotive. He could rebuild a transmission blindfolded, with one hand tied behind his back. I told him I needed his expertise, his knowledge of automotive systems, to help me devise a series of escalating malfunctions, things that would be increasingly disruptive, increasingly expensive to fix, but wouldn't cause any permanent damage. Tom, a man of few words, simply grunted. "Tell me what you have in mind," he said. Over the next few days, I worked with David, Sarah, and Tom, refining my plan, tweaking the details, ensuring that every contingency was accounted for. We met in my garage, surrounded by tools, diagrams, and schematics. It felt like old times, like being back at Boeing, tackling a complex engineering challenge. Only this time, the stakes were different. This wasn't about building something new. It was about dismantling something old. It was about taking something apart, piece by piece, systematically and deliberately. It was about revenge. As the plan took shape, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The anger, the hurt, it was still there, but it was no longer a raging fire. It had been channeled, focused, transformed into a quiet, cold determination. They thought they could outsmart me, did they? They thought they could take advantage of an old man? They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea what I was capable of. They were about to learn a valuable lesson. They were about to learn that experience is a powerful weapon, and that revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold. And I was about to serve it up, one carefully calculated malfunction at a time. The ticking of the Mustang's engine, that insidious little tick-tick-tick, was driving me crazy. It wasn't just a mechanical noise. It was a constant reminder of Kevin's arrogance, Frank's betrayal, and my own foolishness. How could I have been so naive? How could I have let them play me like a fiddle? I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and gadgets I'd accumulated over a lifetime of tinkering and building. My workbench, usually a haven of order and precision, was a chaotic mess. Wrenches, screwdrivers, and multimeters lay scattered amongst half-finished projects and piles of spare parts. It mirrored the state of my mind. Confused, frustrated, angry. But amidst the chaos, a spark of clarity began to emerge. An engineer's mind, trained to analyze, to dissect, to solve problems. That's what I was. An engineer. Not just a retired engineer, but an engineer to my core. And this whole mess with Frank and Kevin, it was just another problem. A complex problem, yes, but a problem nonetheless. And problems were meant to be solved. I started by breaking down the situation, dissecting it into its component parts. The problem: I'd been cheated, swindled, and betrayed. The goal: to rectify the situation, to restore balance, to achieve justice. The constraints: I couldn't just resort to violence or vandalism. That wasn't my style. I needed something more sophisticated, something more elegant, something that would teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. I began to think strategically, like a general planning a campaign. I needed to identify their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. Kevin, the arrogant young mechanic, was clearly incompetent, relying on bluster and intimidation to mask his lack of skill. He was also, judging by the online reviews, deeply in debt. A few well-placed financial setbacks could push him over the edge. Frank, the treacherous friend, was motivated by greed, by a desperate need for money. He'd gambled big and lost, and now he was scrambling to recover his losses. He'd seen my Mustang as a quick and easy way to make a profit, a pawn in his desperate game of financial catch-up. Exposing his shady dealings, revealing his true nature, could ruin him. I started making notes, sketching diagrams, listing potential strategies. My engineer's mind, usually focused on the intricacies of aircraft design, was now focused on a different kind of engineering. The engineering of revenge. It wasn't something I was proud of, but it was something I felt I had to do. Not just for myself, but for all the other people they'd taken advantage of, all the other old men they'd dismissed and disregarded. I thought about the tools at my disposal. My knowledge of automotive systems, my experience with electronics and software, my network of contacts in the engineering community. I had a unique set of skills that could be repurposed, redirected, weaponized. A plan began to form, a complex and intricate web of interconnected actions designed to create maximum disruption and inflict maximum pain. It wouldn't be quick, it wouldn't be easy, but it would be effective. It would be a masterpiece of engineering, a testament to my ingenuity and determination. A symphony of malfunctions, a cascade of consequences. I looked at the clock. It was almost dawn. The first rays of sunlight were beginning to filter through the workshop window, casting long shadows across the cluttered workbench. I felt a surge of energy, a renewed sense of purpose. The anger, the hurt, it was still there, but it was no longer a consuming fire. It had been transformed, refined, focused into a cold, hard determination. They had underestimated me. They had misjudged me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They were about to learn a valuable lesson. They were about to learn that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. The ticking noise, that damned ticking noise, was still there, a constant, irritating reminder of Kevin's smirk, his condescending tone, his "you know nothing." I'd spent the last few days stewing, replaying the encounter over and over in my head. The anger simmered, a low, steady burn in my gut. I wasn't just going to fix the car, I was going to fix them. I paced back and forth in my workshop, the cluttered space, a reflection of the turmoil in my mind. Tools lay scattered across the workbench, amidst piles of spare parts and half-finished projects. 40 years at Boeing, and what did I have to show for it? A sabotaged Mustang and a burning sense of injustice. I stopped pacing, picked up a small brass gear, and began to idly turn it over in my hands. It was a leftover piece from a clock I'd repaired a few months ago, a delicate mechanism of intricate teeth and precisely calibrated movements. And as I turned the gear, a thought began to form, a small seed of an idea taking root in the fertile ground of my frustration. I wasn't just going to get my money back. That wouldn't be enough. They had to understand, they had to feel the consequences of their actions. They had to learn a lesson they wouldn't forget. I put the gear down, went over to my workbench, and pulled out a notepad and a pen. I started making lists, jotting down ideas, sketching diagrams. My engineer's mind, trained to analyze, to dissect, to solve problems, began to shift its focus. This wasn't about aircraft design anymore. This was about something else entirely. This was about revenge. I thought about Kevin, the arrogant young mechanic, with his greasy overalls and his condescending smirk. He was clearly incompetent, relying on bluster and intimidation to mask his lack of skill. And he was also, judging by the online reviews, deeply in debt. A few well-placed financial setbacks could push him over the edge. Then there was Frank T., he treacherous friend, the man I'd trusted for years. He was motivated by greed, by a desperate need for money. He'd seen my Mustang as a quick and easy way to make a profit, a pawn in his desperate game of financial catch-up. Exposing his shady dealings, revealing his true nature, could ruin him. I began to see the possibilities, the potential for disruption, for chaos. I had a unique set of skills, a lifetime of experience, a network of contacts. I knew how things worked, how systems functioned, how to make them malfunction. I thought about David Miller, my old colleague from Boeing, the electronics whiz, who could build anything from a custom circuit board to a miniature drone. I thought about Sarah Johnson, the software engineer who could write code that could make a toaster dance the tango. And I thought about Tom Evans, the mechanical engineer who could rebuild a car engine with his eyes closed. These weren't just colleagues. They were friends, comrades, brothers and sisters in arms. And they owed me a few favors. I could call on them, enlist their help, pool our resources. Together we could devise a plan, a strategy, a series of carefully calibrated actions designed to bring Kevin and Frank to their knees. The seed of an idea had been planted, and now it was starting to grow, taking root, spreading its tendrils through the fertile ground of my anger and resentment. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be quick, but it would be effective. It would be a masterpiece of engineering, a symphony of malfunctions, a cascade of consequences. I looked at the ticking clock on the wall, the steady rhythm a counterpoint to the erratic ticking of the Mustang's engine. Time was of the essence. I had a lot of work to do. I picked up the phone and dialed David's number. "David," I said, "I need your help. I have a project." And as I explained my situation, the plan began to take shape, a complex and intricate web of interconnected actions designed to bring Kevin and Frank to their knees. This wasn't just about the car anymore. This was about something much bigger. This was about justice. This was about revenge. And I, George Prescott, retired aeronautical engineer, was just the man to deliver it. The internet, what a thing. Never really used it much during my Boeing days. We had our mainframes, our proprietary software, our secure networks. The internet, back then, it was just a novelty, a toy for academics and hobbyists. But now, in retirement, I was starting to see its potential. A vast repository of information, a digital window into the lives of others. A powerful tool if you knew how to use it. I started with Kevin, the arrogant young mechanic. His garage had a website, a flashy, poorly designed affair full of stock photos of shiny cars and generic testimonials. Nothing useful there. But then I found the online reviews. Yelp, Google, Facebook. Page after page of complaints. A litany of disgruntled customers recounting their experiences with Kevin's garage. Overcharged repairs, shoddy workmanship, aggressive and condescending behavior, a clear pattern of dishonesty and incompetence. One review in particular caught my eye. A young couple had taken their car to Kevin for a simple brake job. Kevin had convinced them they needed a new engine, charging them thousands of dollars for a completely unnecessary repair. The couple had later taken their car to another mechanic, who confirmed that the engine was perfectly fine. They'd tried to get their money back from Kevin, but he'd refused, claiming that the work had been necessary. The couple had filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau, but nothing had come of it. I read through dozens of similar reviews, each one adding to the growing picture of Kevin's shady business practices. It was clear that he wasn't just a bad mechanic. He was a con artist, preying on unsuspecting customers, using his knowledge and position to take advantage of them. But the reviews also revealed something else, something potentially more useful. Several customers mentioned Kevin's gambling habit, his frequent trips to the local casino, his mounting debts. One reviewer even claimed to have seen Kevin arguing with a loan shark outside the garage. This was valuable information, a weakness, a vulnerability, something I could exploit. Next, I turned my attention to Frank. I knew he'd been having financial difficulties lately, but I didn't know the extent of it. I started by searching for his name online, hoping to find some clues, some evidence of his current situation. It didn't take long. News articles, court records, online forums. The picture that emerged was not pretty. Frank had a history of shady business dealings, of cutting corners, of taking advantage of people. He'd been involved in several lawsuits, accused of fraud, breach of contract, even embezzlement. He'd managed to avoid serious consequences in the past, but it was clear that he was living on borrowed time. His current financial difficulties were just the latest in a long string of bad decisions and questionable ethics. He'd invested heavily in a real estate development that had gone belly up, leaving him with a mountain of debt and a string of angry creditors. He was desperate, grasping at straws, looking for any way to make a quick buck. And my Mustang, my beloved Mustang, had become his latest target. I leaned back in my chair, a grim satisfaction settling over me. I had what I needed. I knew their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities, their motivations. I knew how they operated, how they thought. I had the pieces of the puzzle, and now it was time to put them together. It was time to start building. Not an airplane this time, but something else entirely. Something more devious, something more destructive. I opened a new document on my laptop and began to type. The title, Operation Mustang's Revenge. I figured I'd better get a closer look at this Kevin's operation. Couldn't just rely on internet gossip, even if it was plentiful. So I did what any self-respecting retiree with too much time on his hands would do. I became a regular at the local coffee shop across the street from Kevin's garage. Perfect vantage point. I could sip my lukewarm coffee, pretend to read the paper, and observe everything going on across the street. Turns out those online reviews weren't exaggerating. Over the next few days, I saw it all. Customers coming in with minor issues, leaving with hefty bills and cars that seemed to run worse than before. I saw Kevin yelling at his employees, throwing tools, generally acting like a spoiled brat who'd gotten his hands on a wrench set. The place was a mess, too. Greasy, disorganized, tools scattered everywhere. It looked more like a junkyard than a repair shop. One afternoon, I saw a tow truck pull up with a brand new BMW on the flatbed. The driver went into the garage, talked to Kevin for a few minutes, then pointed at something under the car. Kevin took a look, shrugged, and went back inside. A few hours later, the BMW was driven out of the garage, seemingly fixed. But the next day, the same tow truck was back, hauling the same BMW. This time, the driver looked furious. He stormed into the garage, and a loud argument ensued. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught snippets. Ripped off, didn't fix anything, piece of junk. The driver stomped out, leaving the BMW on the flatbed. Kevin stood in the doorway, watching the tow truck drive away, a smug look on his face. That's when I knew for sure. This wasn't just incompetence. This was deliberate. Kevin was running a scam, plain and simple. He was taking advantage of people, using his knowledge and position to extort money from them. And the more I watched, the more convinced I became that he was in deep financial trouble. He was always on the phone, arguing with someone, his voice tight with desperation. I even saw him meet with a couple of shady-looking characters in the back alley behind the garage, exchanging envelopes filled with cash. Loan sharks, I figured. One morning I saw Kevin arrive at the garage in a brand-new pickup truck, a gleaming, top-of-the-line model. It seemed out of place, given the state of his business and the online reviews detailing his financial woes. I made a mental note of the truck's make and model. Later that day, back at home, I did some research. Turns out, that particular model was notorious for its complex electronics, its finicky computer systems. A perfect target for a little engineered malfunction. I smiled, a slow, cold smile. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. Kevin's arrogance, his incompetence, his desperation, they were all weaknesses, vulnerabilities I could exploit. I had a plan, a strategy, a way to make him pay for what he'd done. And it was going to be beautiful, a masterpiece of engineering, a symphony of malfunctions, a cascade of consequences. He had underestimated me. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He was about to learn a valuable lesson. He was about to learn that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. Frank, he was a tougher nut to crack. Unlike Kevin, who practically advertised his shadiness, Frank was more subtle. He presented a respectable facade, a pillar of the community, a successful businessman. But I knew better. I'd seen glimpses of the man beneath the mask, the flashes of greed, the hints of desperation. My initial internet searches had turned up some interesting tidbits, a few lawsuits, some questionable business practices, a failed real estate venture. But nothing concrete, nothing I could really use. I needed something more, something that would expose his true nature, something that would bring him down. So I started digging deeper. I went to the county courthouse, spent hours sifting through public records, looking for anything related to Frank's business dealings. It was tedious work, poring over dusty files and legal documents, but I was determined, and my persistence paid off. I found what I was looking for. A series of loan applications, all rejected. Each one painted a grim picture of Frank's financial situation. Mounting debts, dwindling assets, a desperate scramble to stay afloat. He was drowning, and he was looking for a lifeline. And he'd seen my Mustang as that lifeline. One document in particular caught my eye, a loan application for a classic car dealership. Frank had apparently been trying to secure funding to open a dealership specializing in vintage and collectible cars. The application had been rejected due to his poor credit history and lack of collateral, but the business plan attached to the application was revealing. It listed several potential acquisitions, including my Mustang. He'd estimated its value at twice what he'd offered me, clearly planning to flip it for a quick profit. I also found records of a recent property sale. Frank had sold his vacation home, a beautiful cabin in the mountains. The sale price was significantly below market value, suggesting a desperate need for cash. He was selling off his assets, trying to raise money any way he could. I left the courthouse with a stack of documents and a sense of grim satisfaction. I had what I needed. I had proof of Frank's desperation, his greed, his willingness to betray a friend for a quick buck, and I knew exactly how to use it. But I wasn't done yet. I still needed to understand his relationship with Kevin. How had they met? What kind of deal had they made? I went back to my surveillance post at the coffee shop, watching Kevin's garage, waiting for an opportunity. It came a few days later. I saw Frank pull up in his car, a late-model sedan that looked like it had seen better days. He went into the garage, and I watched as he and Kevin engaged in an animated conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language spoke volumes. Frank was agitated, gesturing wildly, his voice rising in anger. Kevin, on the other hand, remained calm, a smug look on his face. He seemed to be enjoying Frank's discomfort. After a few minutes, Frank stormed out of the garage, slamming the door behind him. Kevin watched him go, then turned and went back inside, a triumphant grin on his face. I had a feeling I knew what that conversation was about. Frank was probably pressuring Kevin to move faster, to get the Mustang deal done. And Kevin, now that he had Frank in his pocket, was probably enjoying the power he held over him. I finished my coffee, paid my bill, and left the coffee shop. I had what I needed. I had the pieces of the puzzle, and now it was time to put them together. It was time to start building. Not an airplane this time, but something else entirely. Something more devious. Something more destructive. I had a plan, a strategy, a way to make them both pay for what they'd done. And it was going to be beautiful, a masterpiece of engineering, a symphony of malfunctions, a cascade of consequences. They had underestimated me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They were about to learn a valuable lesson. They were about to learn that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. And I, George Prescott, was ready to settle the score. I called David first. "David, it's George. Remember that little project we talked about?" David chuckled. "The one involving a certain Mustang and a couple of unscrupulous individuals?" "How could I forget?" I told him I was ready to move forward. "Excellent," he said. "Come on over. I've got something to show you." David's workshop was a wonderland of electronics, a chaotic jumble of wires, circuit boards, and various gadgets and gizmos. He led me over to his workbench, where a small device lay nestled amongst a tangle of wires. It was about the size of a deck of cards, with a small antenna protruding from one end. "This little beauty," David said, holding it up with a grin, "is a custom-built EMP generator. Short bursts, highly targeted, completely untraceable. It'll fry any electronic device within a few feet, without leaving a trace." He explained how it worked, the technical details washing over me in a wave of nostalgia. It was like being back at Boeing, discussing the intricacies of some new aerospace technology. Only this time, the application was different. Next, I visited Sarah. She'd been busy too. "I've written a program," she said, showing me a series of lines of code on her laptop screen, "that will subtly alter the readings on Kevin's diagnostic equipment. It'll make a perfectly healthy engine look like it's about to explode. False error codes, phantom readings, the works." She explained how she'd reverse-engineered the software used by Kevin's diagnostic tools, identifying vulnerabilities she could exploit. It was brilliant, devious, and exactly what I needed. Finally, I met with Tom. He'd been thinking about the mechanical aspects of the plan, and he had some ideas. "We can start small," he suggested. "A loose hose clamp here, a slightly misaligned sensor there, things that will cause intermittent problems, annoyances more than anything else. Then we can escalate. A faulty fuel injector, a clogged catalytic converter, things that will be more expensive to fix, more disruptive to his business." He outlined a series of escalating malfunctions, each one designed to create maximum inconvenience and financial strain for Kevin. It was a masterpiece of mechanical sabotage, a symphony of subtle disruptions. Over the next few weeks, we worked together, refining the plan, tweaking the details, ensuring that every contingency was accounted for. We met in my garage, transforming it into a makeshift command center, complete with diagrams, flowcharts, and a whiteboard covered in equations and schematics. It felt like old times, like being back at Boeing, working on some top-secret project. Only this time, the mission was personal. David provided me with several EMP generators, each one programmed to target a specific electronic device. Sarah gave me a USB drive containing the diagnostic software she'd modified. And Tom supplied me with a list of parts and tools I'd need to implement his mechanical sabotage plan. I spent hours in my garage, practicing, experimenting, making sure I knew exactly how to use each device, how to implement each step of the plan. I felt a strange sense of excitement, a thrill of anticipation. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about something more. It was about using my skills, my knowledge, my experience, to right a wrong. It was about taking back control, about reclaiming my dignity. As the day of the operation approached, I felt a sense of calm, a quiet confidence. I was ready. I had a plan, a team, and a burning desire for justice. They had underestimated me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They were about to learn a valuable lesson. They were about to learn that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. And I, George Prescott, was about to settle the score. The Mustang sat in my garage, a silent accusation. That ticking noise, a constant, irritating drumbeat, fueling my resolve. I couldn't just fix it. That wouldn't be enough. They had to pay. Both of them. I'd spent my entire career solving problems. Complex, multi-layered problems that required meticulous planning, precise execution, and a healthy dose of ingenuity. This situation, while different, was still a problem. And I was an engineer, damn it. Problems were what I did. I sat down at my workbench, cluttered with tools, diagrams, and parts catalogs. I needed a plan, a strategy, something elegant. Something that would not only fix my Mustang, but also deliver a dose of well-deserved payback. And I knew just the people who could help. First, I called David Miller. David and I had worked together at Boeing for years. He was a wizard with electronics, a true genius when it came to circuits and microcontrollers. After retirement, he'd set up a small workshop in his garage, tinkering with all sorts of gadgets and gizmos. I explained my situation, the sabotage, the betrayal, the whole sordid affair. David listened patiently, a slow smile spreading across his face. "So, George," he said when I'd finished, "you want to give these clowns a little taste of their own medicine?" "Something like that," I replied. "I think I can help with that," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I've been working on a little something that might just do the trick. A compact EMP generator. Short bursts, highly targeted. Fry a circuit board from across the street, no problem." He paused. "Consider it a retirement project." Next, I called Sarah Johnson, another former Boeing colleague. Sarah was a software engineer, specializing in embedded systems. She could write code that could make a toaster dance the tango. I told her about Kevin's diagnostic equipment, how I needed a way to manipulate the readings to make a perfectly healthy engine appear to be on the verge of collapse. Interesting," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I think I can write a program that will do just that, inject some false error codes, generate some phantom readings. Make it look like the engine is about to throw a rod through the block," she chuckled. "It'll be fun." Finally, I called Tom Evans, our resident mechanical guru. Tom could rebuild a car engine blindfolded, with one hand tied behind his back. I explained my need for a series of escalating malfunctions, things that would be increasingly disruptive and expensive to fix, but wouldn't cause any permanent damage. Tom, a man of few words, simply grunted. "Tell me what you have in mind." Over the next few weeks, we met regularly in my garage, transforming it into a makeshift war room. We spread blueprints and diagrams across my workbench, brainstorming ideas, refining the plan, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. It felt like old times, being back at Boeing, tackling a complex engineering challenge. Only this time, the stakes were different. This was personal. David provided me with several EMP generators, each one tailored to target a specific electronic system. He showed me how to use them, how to adjust the frequency and intensity of the pulse, how to ensure maximum disruption with minimal risk of permanent damage. Sarah delivered a USB drive containing the modified diagnostic software. She explained how to install it on Kevin's computer, how to activate the program, how to control the false readings. It was a masterpiece of software engineering, a digital Trojan horse designed to wreak havoc on Kevin's business. Tom, meanwhile, had devised a series of mechanical malfunctions, ranging from loose hose clamps and misaligned sensors to faulty fuel injectors and clogged catalytic converters. He provided me with a detailed list of parts and tools, along with step-by-step instructions on how to implement each malfunction. It was a symphony of subtle sabotage, a masterpiece of mechanical mayhem. As the plan took shape, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The anger, the hurt, it was still there, but it had been transformed into something colder, something sharper, a quiet resolve, a steely determination. They had underestimated me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They were about to learn a valuable lesson. They were about to learn that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. And I, George Prescott, was ready to settle the score. Tom's plan was a thing of beauty, a testament to his years of experience working on everything from lawnmowers to Formula One race cars. He laid it all out for me, step by step, like a surgeon explaining a delicate procedure. We started with the small stuff, the annoyances, the things that would make Kevin scratch his head and curse under his breath. "A loose hose clamp here," Tom explained, pointing to a diagram of Kevin's prized pickup truck, "will cause a slow coolant leak. Nothing major, just enough to create a persistent puddle under the truck, make him think he has a bigger problem." He tapped another spot on the diagram. "A slightly misaligned sensor on the intake manifold will throw off the air/fuel mixture, causing the engine to run rough, maybe stall occasionally. Just enough to make him think he needs a new fuel pump, or maybe even a rebuild." Tom had a mischievous glint in his eye as he described each malfunction, clearly relishing the opportunity to apply his expertise in such an unconventional way. "These little things," he said, "they'll drive him nuts. He'll spend hours, days even, trying to diagnose the problems, replacing parts that don't need replacing, wasting time and money. Then, we moved on to the more serious stuff, the malfunctions that would really hit Kevin where it hurt his wallet. A faulty fuel injector, Tom continued, will cause a misfire, a noticeable loss of power. He'll probably think it's a bad spark plug, or maybe a clogged fuel filter. He'll replace those, of course, but the problem will persist. He'll be pulling his hair out trying to figure it out. And then, Tom said with a wicked grin, we introduced the pièce de résistance, a clogged catalytic converter. That'll trigger a check engine light, reduce performance even further, and require a costly replacement. He'll be shelling out big bucks for that one. Tom had thought of everything. He even had a plan for Kevin's diagnostic equipment. A little bit of strategically placed conductive paint inside the casing, he explained, will create intermittent shorts, causing the equipment to malfunction, giving false readings. He'll think his tools are broken, that he's going crazy. It'll drive him absolutely bonkers. We spent hours in my garage going over the plan, refining the details, making sure everything was perfect. Tom showed me how to implement each malfunction, how to make it look like normal wear and tear, how to avoid leaving any trace of tampering. He even provided me with a list of suppliers where I could purchase the necessary parts, ensuring that everything was readily available and untraceable. As we worked, I felt a growing sense of anticipation, a thrill of excitement. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about something more. It was about using my skills, my knowledge, my experience, to right a wrong. It was about taking back control, about reclaiming my dignity. It was about showing those two punks that they had messed with the wrong retired engineer. I looked at the diagrams spread out on my workbench, the intricate lines and symbols a testament to Tom's ingenuity and my own determination. This wasn't just a plan. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of mechanical sabotage, a symphony of subtle disruptions, and I, George Prescott, was the conductor. I picked up a wrench, the weight of it familiar and comforting in my hand. It was time to get to work. It was time to start building. Not an airplane this time, but something else entirely. Something more devious, something more destructive. I had a plan, a team, and a burning desire for justice. They had underestimated me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They were about to learn a valuable lesson. They were about to learn that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. And I, George Prescott, was about to settle the score. Framing Kevin, that was the tricky part. I couldn't just plant drugs in his garage or something crude like that. It had to be subtle, believable, and ultimately untraceable. It had to be engineered. I started by thinking about Kevin's weaknesses, his vulnerabilities. The man was a walking liability. Sloppy, disorganized, careless. He left a trail of evidence like a snail leaves a trail of slime. All I had to do was enhance that trail. I spent a few evenings observing his routine. He'd arrive at the garage early, usually around 7 a.m., unlock the doors, and disappear inside. He'd emerge a few hours later, covered in grease, often carrying a bag of fast food. He'd eat his lunch in his office, a small, cluttered room at the back of the garage, then return to work. He'd leave around 6 p.m., locking the doors behind him. The office, that was my target. I knew I needed to get inside, but I couldn't just break in. That was too risky. So I did some research. I found the manufacturer of the security system he used, downloaded the user manual, and studied it carefully. Turns out, it was a fairly common model with a well-known vulnerability. A simple code sequence, entered into the keypad, would bypass the alarm and unlock the door. It was a risk, but a calculated one. One night after Kevin had left for the day, I drove to the garage, parked a few blocks away, and walked the rest of the way. I approached the building cautiously, checking to make sure no one was around. I entered the code sequence into the keypad, and the door clicked open. I slipped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The garage was dark and silent, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator in the break room. I made my way to Kevin's office, using my phone's flashlight to navigate through the cluttered space. The office was a mess. Papers piled everywhere, tools scattered across the desk, empty fast food containers overflowing from the trash can. It was a goldmine of potential evidence. I started by planting a few seemingly innocuous items. A receipt for a large cash purchase at a local electronics store, dated a few weeks before the Mustang incident. a business card for a scrap metal dealer known for his flexible business practices, a few blank invoices with the names and addresses of local businesses that didn't actually exist. Then, I moved on to the more incriminating evidence. I'd purchased a small quantity of a chemical compound commonly used in the production of illegal substances. I carefully sprinkled a tiny amount of the compound on a few tools in Kevin's toolbox, ensuring that it would be detectable by a forensic analysis. I also planted a small bag of white powder, filled with harmless baking soda, in a drawer of his desk. Finally, I planted a few misleading clues that would point suspicion towards Frank. A handwritten note, seemingly from Frank, suggesting a meeting to discuss the Mustang deal. A few emails, fabricated on my laptop, detailing a plan to split the profits from the sale. I made sure to use language that would implicate Frank, while carefully avoiding anything that could link the evidence back to me. I left the office, carefully locking the door behind me, and made my way back to my car. As I drove away, I felt a sense of satisfaction, a quiet sense of accomplishment. It was a risky move, but it was a necessary one. I had set the stage, planted the seeds of doubt, laid the groundwork for Kevin's downfall. And Frank, the treacherous friend, would be caught in the crossfire. They had underestimated me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They were about to learn a valuable lesson. They were about to learn that you don't mess with an engineer. Especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. And I, George Prescott, was just getting started. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air is sharp and clean, and the leaves are just starting to turn. Perfect weather for a drive. Too bad Kevin wouldn't be enjoying it. I'd parked my car a safe distance away, with a clear view of Kevin's garage. I had a thermos of coffee, a comfortable chair, and a front row seat to the show I was about to put on. First act, the phantom fuel leak. Thanks to Tom's expert advice, a strategically loosened hose clamp on Kevin's pickup truck was doing its job admirably. A small but persistent puddle of coolant was forming beneath the engine, guaranteed to raise Kevin's suspicions. I watched as he arrived, noticed the puddle, and let out a string of colorful curses. He spent the next hour poking around under the hood, checking hoses, tightening clamps, generally looking bewildered. He even called a tow truck, convinced he had a major problem. The tow truck driver, after a cursory inspection, shrugged and drove away, leaving Kevin even more frustrated. Act 2. The diagnostic debacle. Sarah's software was working like a charm. I watched as Kevin hooked up his diagnostic equipment to a customer's car, a late-model sedan that looked perfectly healthy. The readings on the screen, however, told a different story. Error codes flashed, warning lights blinked, and the engine's vital signs fluctuated wildly. Kevin scratched his head, rechecked the connections, ran the diagnostics again. Same result. He started muttering to himself, convinced his equipment was malfunctioning. He tried another car, then another. Same problem. He was starting to lose it. Act 3. The tool tantrum. This was my favorite part. I'd carefully placed David's EMP generators around the garage, targeting specific tools and pieces of equipment. I activated the first one, targeting Kevin's prized air compressor. The compressor sputtered, choked, and died with a loud bang. Kevin jumped back, startled, then rushed over to inspect the damage. He fiddled with the switches, checked the power cord, but nothing. It was dead. He kicked the compressor in frustration, then grabbed his electric impact wrench. I activated the next EMP generator. The wrench whirred, then stopped, emitting a faint smell of burning electronics. Kevin threw the wrench across the garage, letting out a roar of frustration. He grabbed another tool, a cordless drill. Same result. He was losing his mind. The grand finale, the pickup truck's revenge. I'd saved the best for last. Tom had rigged Kevin's pickup truck with a series of escalating malfunctions, culminating in a clogged catalytic converter. I watched as Kevin, still fuming from the tool tantrum, climbed into his truck and started the engine. It sputtered, coughed, and barely idled. He revved the engine, but it only made things worse. Black smoke billowed from the exhaust pipe, and the check engine light flashed ominously. Kevin slammed his fist on the steering wheel, then climbed out of the truck, kicking the tires in frustration. He was defeated. I sat back in my chair, sipping my coffee, a quiet sense of satisfaction washing over me. The plan was working perfectly. Kevin was a wreck. his business in chaos, his prized possessions malfunctioning all around him. And Frank was about to have his own set of problems. I had planted the seeds of doubt, the misleading clues that would point suspicion towards him. It was only a matter of time before they turned on each other, each blaming the other for their misfortune. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the street. I packed up my things, climbed into my car, and drove away, leaving Kevin to stew in his own misery. I had a feeling this was just the beginning, the first movement in a symphony of malfunctions, a cascade of consequences. They had underestimated me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They were about to learn a valuable lesson. They were about to learn that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. And I, George Prescott, was just getting started. The waiting was the hardest part. Like a slow-burning fuse, the anticipation built, a quiet hum of excitement mixed with a touch of nerves. I'd spent weeks planning, preparing, meticulously laying the groundwork for Operation Mustang's revenge. Now it was time to see if my handiwork would pay off. I chose a Monday morning, figuring Kevin would be at his most vulnerable, fresh off a weekend of whatever shenanigans he got up to. I parked my car a few blocks from his garage, just far enough away to avoid suspicion, close enough to have a clear view of the action. I settled into my seat, armed with a thermos of coffee and a pair of binoculars, ready to enjoy the show. The first sign of trouble came early. Kevin arrived in his gleaming pickup truck, looking bleary-eyed and irritable. He fumbled with his keys, dropped them twice, and finally managed to unlock the garage door. As he pulled the truck inside, I saw a small puddle forming beneath the engine. Tom's handiwork. A strategically loosened hose clamp, slowly but surely draining the coolant. I watched as Kevin went about his morning routine, opening the garage, turning on the lights, setting up his tools. He seemed oblivious to the puddle forming beneath his truck, too preoccupied with whatever was on his mind. Good. Let him stew. The next act of the play began a few hours later, when a customer brought in a late-model sedan for a diagnostic check. Kevin hooked up his fancy diagnostic equipment, the kind that cost more than my Mustang, and started running tests. This was Sarah's moment to shine. Her subtly modified software was about to wreak havoc. I watched through my binoculars as the readings on Kevin's diagnostic screen started to go haywire. Error codes flashed, warning lights blinked, and the engine's vital signs fluctuated wildly. Kevin frowned, rechecked the connections, ran the tests again. Same result. He started muttering to himself, clearly confused. He tried another car, a beat-up pickup truck that looked like it had seen better days. Same problem. The diagnostic equipment, full of spitting out nonsensical readings, making perfectly healthy engines look like they were on the verge of exploding. Kevin was starting to panic. He paced back and forth, scratching his head, pulling at his hair. He called a colleague, another mechanic who worked at a different shop, and described the problem. The colleague, clearly amused, suggested that maybe Kevin's equipment was faulty, that maybe he should invest in some new tools. Kevin slammed the phone down, his face red with frustration. Now for the main event. I activated one of David's EMP generators, the one targeting Kevin's air compressor. The compressor, which had been humming steadily in the background, suddenly sputtered, choked, and died with a loud bang. Kevin jumped, startled, then rushed over to inspect the damage. He fiddled with the switches, checked the power cord, but nothing. It was dead as a doornail. He kicked the compressor in frustration, then grabbed his electric impact wrench. I activated another EMP generator. The wrench whirred briefly, then stopped, emitting a faint smell of burning electronics. Kevin's frustration was reaching a boiling point. He threw the wrench across the garage, letting out a string of curses that would make a sailor blush. He grabbed another tool, a cordless drill. I activated the next EMP generator. Same result. The drill sputtered and died, its battery mysteriously drained. Kevin was losing it. He was pacing back and forth, ranting and raving, throwing tools around the garage like a toddler throwing a tantrum. It was time for the grand finale. Kevin, still fuming, stormed over to his pickup truck, climbed inside, and slammed the door. He turned the key, and the engine sputtered to life, then immediately started running rough. He revved the engine, but it only made things worse. Black smoke billowed from the exhaust pipe, and the check engine light flashed ominously. This was Tom's masterpiece, the clogged catalytic converter, the final nail in the coffin. Kevin slammed his fist on the steering wheel, then climbed out of the truck, kicking the tires in frustration. He was defeated, broken. He stood there for a moment, staring at his malfunctioning truck, his ruined tools, his chaotic garage. He looked like a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I smiled, a slow, satisfied smile. Phase 1 of Operation Mustang's revenge was complete. Kevin was in disarray, his business in chaos, his life slowly unraveling. And Frank? Well, Frank was next. Kevin's meltdown was just the opening act. The real fireworks started a few days later. I'd planted the seeds, carefully and strategically, and now it was time to watch them grow. First came the whispers. Rumors spread through the small town like wildfire. Kevin's garage, already struggling with a reputation for shoddy work and overcharging, was now the subject of darker whispers. People talked about shady dealings, about questionable practices, about possible criminal activity. I'd made a few anonymous calls, dropped a few hints, nothing too specific, just enough to get people talking. Then came the online reviews. New ones, different from the usual complaints about overcharging and bad repairs. These were more pointed. People talked about seeing strange activity at the garage late at night, about unfamiliar vehicles coming and going, about hushed conversations in the back alley. I'd created a few fake accounts, using different names and locations, adding fuel to the fire, fanning the flames of suspicion. Next, the local newspaper picked up the story. A small article, buried deep in the local news section, about a quote of mysterious malfunctions plaguing local businesses, including Kevin's garage. The article mentioned the rumors of illegal activity, the online reviews, the growing concern among residents. I'd sent an anonymous tip to the newspaper, a carefully worded email that hinted at something bigger, something darker, lurking beneath the surface. The authorities, always eager to jump on a potential scandal, started sniffing around. A couple of unmarked cars parked across the street from the garage, observing the comings and goings. A plainclothes officer came into the coffee shop, asking questions, showing pictures of Kevin and Frank, fishing for information. I played dumb, of course, feigning ignorance, offering vague platitudes about those darn kids these days. The pressure was mounting, and Kevin was starting to crack. I saw him pacing back and forth in front of his garage, his face pale, his hands trembling. He was on the phone constantly, arguing with someone, his voice tight with desperation. He'd lost weight, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. The final blow came a week later. The local police, armed with a search warrant, raided Kevin's garage. They spent hours inside, combing through every nook and cranny, searching for evidence. And they found it. The planted chemicals, the fake invoices, the misleading clues pointing towards Frank. It was all there, just as I'd planned. News of the raid spread quickly. The local TV station sent a news crew, cameras rolling, capturing the scene as Kevin was led away in handcuffs. His face, a mask of disbelief and despair, was plastered all over the local news. His reputation was ruined, his business destroyed. He was finished. The garage was shut down, padlocked by the authorities. A sign on the door read, "Closed by order of the police department." The tow trucks that had once been a regular fixture outside the garage were now gone, replaced by a growing pile of trash and discarded furniture. The place looked like a ghost town, a testament to the destructive power of a well-executed plan. I watched from my usual spot at the coffee shop, sipping my coffee, a quiet sense of satisfaction washing over me. Kevin was gone, his reign of terror over. And Frank, well, Frank was next. The net was closing in, the walls were crumbling, and I, George Prescott, retired aeronautical engineer, had orchestrated it all. They had underestimated me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had learned a valuable lesson. They had learned that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. Kevin, hauled off in handcuffs, his face plastered all over the local news. That was just the beginning. The dominoes were falling, and Frank, the so-called friend, was next in line. He'd been sweating bullets ever since the raid on Kevin's garage. I knew, because I'd been watching him. He was like a rat in a cage, pacing back and forth, making frantic phone calls, his face a mask of fear and desperation. The planted evidence, the carefully crafted web of lies, it was all starting to unravel. The police had questioned him, of course, shown him the evidence they'd found in Kevin's office, the note, the emails, all pointing directly at him. Frank denied everything, naturally, but his denials lacked conviction. He was sweating, stammering, his eyes darting around nervously. The cops, they could smell the fear on him. They knew he was hiding something. And then Kevin cracked. Facing serious jail time, he decided to sing like a canary. He told the police everything. About Frank's plan to sabotage my Mustang. About the deal they'd made to split the profits. He even produced a copy of the agreement they'd signed. A hastily scribbled document on the back of a greasy napkin. I'd found that napkin a few weeks earlier, tucked away in Kevin's toolbox, and made a copy before returning it to its hiding place. A little bit of foresight goes a long way. The police paid Frank another visit, this time armed with Kevin's confession and the damning napkin agreement. Frank, faced with overwhelming evidence, finally crumbled. He confessed to everything, his carefully constructed facade of respectability shattering into a million pieces. The local newspaper had a field day. Local businessman implicated in car sabotage scheme. The headlines screamed. Frank's picture, right next to Kevin's, was plastered all over the front page. His reputation, his business, his social standing, all gone, vanished like smoke in the wind. But the best part was yet to come, the confrontation. I knew it was coming. Kevin, out on bail, a broken and desperate man, was convinced that Frank had set him up. He blamed Frank for everything. For the raid, for the ruined business, for the public humiliation. He wanted revenge. I positioned myself across the street from Frank's office, another strategically chosen vantage point, and waited. It didn't take long. Kevin's beat-up pickup truck, miraculously resurrected from its mechanically induced coma, screeched to a halt in front of Frank's office building. Kevin jumped out, his face contorted with rage, and stormed inside. I watched through my binoculars as the confrontation unfolded. It was a masterpiece of human drama, a Shakespearean tragedy played out in a sterile office setting. Kevin yelled. Frank pleaded. Accusations flew back and forth like daggers. The argument escalated, voices rising, fists slamming on desks. It was glorious. The shouting attracted the attention of other tenants in the building. Doors opened. Curious faces peered out, eager to witness the spectacle. Someone called the police, reporting a disturbance. The cops arrived, just in time to see Kevin and Frank wrestling on the floor, a tangle of limbs and expletives. They were both arrested, hauled off in separate squad cars, their faces a mixture of anger, humiliation, and utter defeat. I watched as the police cars drove away, a quiet sense of satisfaction washing over me. It was over. The plan had worked. Kevin and Frank, the arrogant mechanic and the treacherous friend, had been brought down, their lives ruined, their reputations tarnished. Justice, as they say, had been served. And me? I went home, parked my Mustang in the garage, and finally, after weeks of tension and anticipation, I slept like a baby. Kevin, out on bail and looking like a week-old dish rag, showed up at Frank's office unannounced. I knew it was coming. A corner office, big windows, prime viewing from the coffee shop across the street. Perfect. I'd grabbed my usual corner booth, ordered a black coffee, and settled in for the show. Kevin's truck, sputtering and wheezing like a chain smoker with a bad cold, pulled up to the curb. He practically leaped out, slamming the door so hard I thought the windows would shatter. He marched across the sidewalk, a man on a mission, and disappeared into the office building. I took a sip of my coffee. Showtime. A few minutes later, the fireworks started. I could see them through the window, Kevin and Frank, facing off in Frank's office. Kevin was yelling, his face red, his arms flailing. Frank, looking pale and shaken, was backing away, trying to placate him. It was a silent movie playing out before my eyes, but I could practically hear the dialogue. Accusations, denials, threats. It was beautiful. Then, the shouting started. Real shouting, loud enough to carry across the street. People stopped on the sidewalk, staring up at the window, trying to see what was happening. Office workers in neighboring buildings gathered at their windows, craning their necks for a better view. It was better than a soap opera. "You set me up!" I imagined Kevin roaring. "You told me this old guy was an easy mark. You said it was a sure thing." Frank, I pictured him wringing his hands, his voice trembling. I don't know what you're talking about, Kevin. I had nothing to do with it. It was all your idea. Don't lie to me. Kevin would have screamed, his face inches from Frank's. You're the one who wanted the car. You're the one who promised me a cut of the profits. The argument escalated. I saw Kevin shove Frank, sending him stumbling backwards. Frank, regaining his balance, lunged at Kevin, swinging wildly. They grappled, a tangle of limbs and fury, knocking over furniture, scattering papers across the floor. It was a chaotic ballet of blame and recrimination. The commotion attracted the attention of the building's security guard. He rushed into Frank's office, trying to separate the two men, but it was too late. The damage was done. The shouting, the fighting, the accusations. It was all out in the open. The security guard, realizing he couldn't handle the situation, called the police. Within minutes, 2 squad cars arrived, sirens wailing, lights flashing. The officers rushed into the building, followed by a small crowd of onlookers, eager to witness the unfolding drama. I watched as the police separated Kevin and Frank, hauling them out of the office, their faces a mixture of anger, humiliation, and utter defeat. The crowd on the sidewalk buzzed with excitement, snapping pictures with their phones, sharing the spectacle on social media. It was a public execution, a slow-motion train wreck, and I, George Prescott, retired aeronautical engineer, had orchestrated it all. I finished my coffee, paid my bill, and walked out of the coffee shop, a quiet smile playing on my lips. Justice had been served. They had underestimated me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had learned a valuable lesson. They had learned that you don't mess with an engineer, especially no TA, retired engineer with a score to settle. The local police weren't exactly Sherlock Holmes, but even they could connect the dots I'd so carefully laid out. The planted evidence in Kevin's office, the anonymous tips I'd sent to the newspaper and the Better Business Bureau, the carefully worded online reviews, it all added up to a pretty damning picture. Kevin, already facing charges for operating without a proper license and a handful of other minor infractions, was now staring down the barrel of something much bigger. Fraud, conspiracy, possibly even something related to those chemicals I'd found in his toolbox. Frank, meanwhile, was caught in the same web. The napkin agreement, Kevin's confession, the rejected loan applications detailing his desperate financial situation. It all painted a picture of a man willing to do anything for a quick buck. The authorities dug deeper, uncovering a trail of shady business dealings, unpaid taxes, and questionable real estate transactions. Turns out, Frank wasn't quite the upstanding citizen he pretended to be. The wheels of justice, as they say, grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Kevin, facing mounting legal fees and the prospect of jail time, lost everything. His garage was seized, his tools auctioned off, his reputation in tatters. He lost his mechanic's license, of course, and was slapped with a hefty fine that would likely keep him in debt for the rest of his life. Last I heard, he was working at a car wash, scrubbing grime off other people's bumpers. A far cry from his days as a hotshot mechanic. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Frank's downfall was even more spectacular. The authorities, digging into his finances, uncovered a tangled web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and fraudulent investments. He'd been living a lie for years, a con man masquerading as a successful businessman. His house was foreclosed on, his assets seized, his reputation destroyed. He was facing multiple charges, including fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. He'd likely spend his golden years behind bars, a fitting end to a life built on lies and deceit. No, I didn't feel sorry for him at all. The best part was watching them realize, slowly and painfully, that they'd been outmaneuvered, outwitted by a seemingly harmless retiree. I'd seen the look on Kevin's face during the raid, the dawning comprehension that he'd been played. He'd looked at me, standing across the street, sipping my coffee, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He finally understood. He'd underestimated me. He'd dismissed me as an old fool, a pushover. He'd learned his lesson the hard way. Frank's realization was even more satisfying. I'd run into him at the grocery store a few weeks after his arrest. He looked like a ghost, haggard and defeated. He avoided eye contact at first, but I stopped him just to say hello. He looked at me, and I could see the recognition in his eyes, the slow, dawning horror as he finally understood the intricate web he'd been caught in. He'd underestimated me, too. He'd betrayed a friend, thinking he could get away with it. He'd been wrong, dead wrong. They both thought they could take advantage of me, because I was retired, because I was old. They thought I was weak, vulnerable, easy prey. They'd learned a valuable lesson. They'd learned that experience is a powerful weapon, and that revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold. And I, George Prescott, retired aeronautical engineer, had served it up perfectly. The Mustang purred like a kitten, the engine smooth and powerful, the ticking noise gone, replaced by the satisfying rumble of a perfectly tuned machine. I'd spent the last few weeks restoring her to her former glory, replacing the sabotaged fuel line, fixing the minor damage Kevin had inflicted. It was therapeutic, working with my hands, reconnecting with the machine, erasing the traces of their treachery. She was mine again, whole and pristine, a symbol of my resilience, my ingenuity, my triumph. I drove down the Pacific Coast Highway, the windows down, the salty air whipping through my hair. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. It was a perfect evening, a perfect ending to a challenging chapter in my life. I thought back to the ordeal, the anger, the hurt, the meticulous planning, the slow, methodical execution of my plan. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. I hadn't just gotten my car fixed. I'd reclaimed my dignity, my self-respect. I'd shown those two punks, Kevin and Frank, that they couldn't take advantage of me, that they couldn't dismiss me as just another old man. I'd used my skills, my experience, my knowledge to fight back, to right a wrong. I pulled over to the side of the road, overlooking the ocean. The waves crashed against the rocks below, a rhythmic, soothing sound. I took a deep breath, the salty air filling my lungs. I felt a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction. I'd done what I had to do. I'd protected what was mine. I'd defended my honor. The Mustang, she wasn't just a car anymore. She was a symbol of my resilience, my ingenuity, my refusal to be a victim. She was a reminder that even in retirement, even in the twilight years, there was still fire in my belly, still steel in my spine. I might be retired from Boeing, but I wasn't retired from life. I started the engine, the rumble, a comforting sound, and pulled back onto the highway. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sky was darkening, the stars beginning to appear. I drove on, into the night, the Mustang purring beneath me, a loyal companion on this new leg of my journey. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready. I'd faced challenges before, overcome obstacles, emerged victorious. And I would do it again. I was George Prescott, retired aeronautical engineer, and I was just getting started. I had a feeling retirement wasn't going to be boring after all. As I drove, I thought about what to do with the Mustang. She was a beautiful car, a classic, and she deserved to be appreciated, driven, enjoyed. I wasn't sure I was ready to part with her just yet, but I knew, deep down, that it was time. Time to let go of the past, to move on to the next chapter. A few days later, I placed an ad online, offering the Mustang for sale. I described her meticulously, highlighting her features, her history, her recent restoration. I set a fair price, not too high, not too low, just right. I didn't want to make a killing, I just wanted to find her a good home. The responses poured in. Collectors, enthusiasts, dreamers, people who appreciated the car for what she was, a piece of automotive history, a symbol of a bygone era. I met with several potential buyers, showing them the car, answering their questions, sharing stories of her past. Finally, I found the perfect buyer, a young woman, a mechanical engineer herself, who shared my passion for cars, for engineering, for the beauty of a well-designed machine. She appreciated the Mustang's history, its meticulous restoration, its unique character. She offered me a fair price, and I accepted. I watched as she drove away in the Mustang, a smile on her face, the engine purring contentedly. It was a bittersweet moment, but it was the right thing to do. The Mustang was in good hands, and I was ready to move on. I had my memories, my experiences, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I'd outsmarted two con men and reclaimed my dignity. Retirement, I realized, wasn't about slowing down. It was about finding new challenges, new adventures, new ways to use my skills and experience. And I, George Prescott, retired aeronautical engineer, was ready for whatever came next. The Pacific Coast Highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt winding along the rugged coastline. The Mustang, her engine humming a sweet, steady tune, ate up the miles, the wind whipping through my hair, the salty air filling my lungs. It was a perfect day. The kind of day I'd dreamed of during those long, frustrating weeks when my Mustang sat silent in the garage, a wounded testament to Frank's treachery and Kevin's arrogance. Now she was back where she belonged, on the open road, the sun glinting off her freshly polished chrome, the engine purring like a contented cat. The ticking noise, that insidious little reminder of their betrayal, was gone, replaced by the smooth, powerful hum of a perfectly tuned machine. I'd spent hours, days even, restoring her to her former glory, replacing the sabotaged fuel line, repairing the minor damage Kevin had inflicted. It had been more than just a repair job. It had been a restoration of my own sense of self-worth, a reclaiming of my dignity. I glanced at the odometer, a small smile playing on my lips. She was approaching the 100,000-mile mark, a testament to her durability, her resilience, her enduring spirit. Just like me, I thought. We'd both been through a lot, but we'd come out on the other side, stronger, wiser, more determined than ever. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking display of orange, pink, and purple. I pulled over to the side of the road, overlooking a secluded cove, the waves crashing against the rocks below, a rhythmic, soothing sound. I turned off the engine, the silence broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves and the cry of seagulls overhead. I sat there for a while, just breathing, taking it all in, the beauty of the coastline, the fresh, salty air, the quiet hum of the Mustang's cooling engine. It was a moment of peace, of reflection, of gratitude. Gratitude for my skills, my experience, my resilience. Gratitude for the friends who had helped me, David, Sarah, and Tom, their expertise and ingenuity proving invaluable in my quest for justice. I thought back to the ordeal, the initial shock of Frank's betrayal, the frustration of Kevin's arrogance, the slow, simmering anger that had fueled my plan. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I'd not only gotten my car fixed, I'd exposed 2 con men, brought them to justice, and reclaimed my own sense of self-worth. I'd learned a valuable lesson too, a lesson about the importance of standing up for oneself, of refusing to be a victim, of using one's skills and experience to fight back against injustice. Retirement, I realized, wasn't about slowing down. It was about finding new challenges, new adventures, new ways to use my talents. It was about living life on my own terms, refusing to be defined by age or circumstance. The sky had darkened, the stars beginning to appear, twinkling like diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. I started the Mustang's engine, the rumble a comforting sound in the stillness of the evening. I pulled back onto the highway, the headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. I didn't know where I was going, not exactly, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready for whatever came next. I had my Mustang, my wits, and a newfound appreciation for the power of a well-executed plan. Retirement, I thought, was going to be a lot more interesting than I'd anticipated. And as I drove on, into the night, the Mustang purring beneath me, I couldn't help but smile. The road ahead was open, and I, George Prescott, retired aeronautical engineer, was ready for the ride. The Mustang was gone. I'd sold her. A bittersweet moment, watching her drive away, knowing I'd never sit behind that wheel again. But it was the right thing to do. She was in good hands, with someone who appreciated her, someone who would care for her the way she deserved. The young woman who bought her, Amelia, she was a mechanical engineer, just like me. She'd seen my ad online, and we'd talked for hours about the car, about its history, about the meticulous restoration I'd done. She understood what the Mustang meant to me, not just as a car, but as a symbol of my past, my resilience, my ingenuity. She even knew about the whole Kevin and Frank debacle. I'd told her the story over coffee one afternoon, and she'd been impressed, amused, and maybe a little bit intimidated. "You're a force to be reckoned with, Mr. Prescott," she'd said with a smile. We'd agreed on a fair price, a price that reflected not just the car's market value, but also the time and effort I'd put into restoring her. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about finding the right person, someone who would appreciate the Mustang for what she was. a piece of automotive history, a testament to a bygone era. And Amelia, she was the right person. The day she came to pick up the car, I walked her through every detail, every nut and bolt, every modification I'd made. I showed her the original owner's manual, the service records dating back to 1967, the photos I'd taken during the restoration process. She listened intently, asking questions, absorbing every bit of information like a sponge. She was genuinely interested, genuinely enthusiastic. It was like passing the torch, handing over a cherished heirloom to the next generation. As she drove away, the Mustang's engine purring contentedly, I felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss, but it was quickly replaced by a feeling of satisfaction, of pride, of accomplishment. I'd done what I set out to do. I'd restored the car, got it, and my revenge, and found her a good home. The whole experience, the sabotage, the betrayal, the revenge, it had been a strange journey. It had tested me, pushed me to my limits, forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities, my own capacity for anger and resentment. But it had also shown me my strengths, my resilience, my ingenuity. It had reminded me that I was more than just a retired engineer. I was a problem solver, a strategist, a man who wouldn't be pushed around. I'd gained a newfound appreciation for my skills, for the knowledge and experience I'd accumulated over a lifetime of building and fixing things. I'd learned that retirement wasn't about slowing down. It was about finding new challenges, new adventures, new ways to use my talents. It was about living life on my own terms, refusing to be defined by age or circumstance. I went back into my garage, now empty except for my workbench and a few scattered tools. The space felt different, quieter, emptier, but it also felt lighter. I'd closed a chapter, moved on from the past, and was ready to embrace whatever the future held. I looked around the garage, a small smile playing on my lips. It was time for a new project. Maybe a woodworking project. Or perhaps I'd finally get around to building that model airplane I'd been putting off for years. Whatever it was, I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be bored. Retirement, I was beginning to realize, was just another adventure. And I, George Prescott, retired aeronautical engineer, was ready for the ride. Well, I reckon that's about it. That's my story. The story of how a couple of punks tried to take advantage of an old man, and how that old man turned the tables on them. They thought I was just a harmless retiree, a pushover. They thought they could take my Mustang, my pride and joy, for a pittance. They thought they could get away with it. They were wrong. They underestimated me. They underestimated the power of experience, the value of a lifetime spent solving problems, overcoming challenges, building things that fly. They thought I was over the hill, past my prime. They thought I was obsolete. They couldn't have been more wrong. I used my skills, my knowledge, my connections to build a plan, a strategy, a masterpiece of engineered revenge. I outsmarted them, outmaneuvered them, and brought them down, one carefully calibrated malfunction at a time. I showed them that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. And the Mustang? Well, she's gone now. Sold her to a good home, a young woman, a mechanical engineer herself. She appreciated the car, its history, its unique character. She understood what it meant to me. It was time to let go, to move on, to start a new chapter. This whole experience, it's been eye-opening. It's shown me that retirement isn't about slowing down. It's about finding new challenges, new adventures, new ways to use your talents. It's about living life on your own terms, refusing to be defined by age or circumstance. So if you're out there and you're feeling underestimated, disregarded, dismissed because of your age, remember my story. Remember George Prescott, the retired aeronautical engineer who showed those punks a thing or two. Remember that experience is a powerful weapon, and that revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold. And don't be afraid to serve it up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a woodworking project calling my name. Always wanted to build a grandfather clock. A nice, intricate mechanism with gears and levers and precisely calibrated movements. Something that will last, something that will stand the test of time. Something that will remind me of the time I outsmarted a couple of punks and got my Mustang back. And who knows, maybe I'll even add a little something extra. A little hidden feature, a little surprise for anyone who tries to mess with it. Just a little reminder that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a lot of time on his hands. So thanks for listening, and remember, never underestimate experience, it just might surprise you. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe to Retirement Stories for more tales of us underestimated elders getting our righteous dues. And if you've got a story of your own, share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. Well, I reckon that's my story. How a couple of young punks thought THEY could pull a fast one on an old-timer like me. They figured because I was retired, I was out of the game, soft in the head, ripe for the picking. They learned a valuable lesson. They learned that experience is priceless. And revenge? Revenge is a dish best served cold. They tried to take advantage of me, tried to steal my Mustang, my pride and joy. They thought they could get away with it. They thought I was just some doddering old fool. They were wrong, dead wrong. I used everything I'd learned in my 40 years at Boeing, all those years of designing and building airplanes, to turn the tables on them. I used my engineering skills, my knowledge of systems, my understanding of how things work, and how to make them stop working. I played them like a fiddle. Kevin, that arrogant young mechanic, he learned that a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. He thought he knew everything, but he knew nothing. He learned that experience trumps arrogance every time. And Frank, my so-called friend, he learned the meaning of betrayal. He learned that loyalty and trust are precious commodities, not to be trifled with. He learned that some wounds run deeper than any wrench can fix. They both learned that you don't mess with an engineer, especially not a retired engineer with a score to settle. And I, George Prescott, I settled the score. So if you're out there and you're feeling underestimated, disregarded, dismissed because of your age, remember my story. Remember that experience is a powerful weapon, and that sometimes, just sometimes, a little bit of revenge is exactly what the doctor ordered. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Retirement Stories for more tales of us underestimated elders getting our righteous revenge. And if you've got a story of your own, share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it.